but you classify them as un-American. That means those who promote them are un-American. And I think that's beyond the pale. That is beyond the pale. And I was hoping you were going to come here and apologize for that, because it's simply beyond the pale. So are you willing to apologize for what your company...
Senator, what I just said, there's nothing intended personally. What it was is...
So you're not willing to apologize?
We felt that the tax proposals under consideration were a question of fairness, and the other was that tax proposals under consideration were inconsistent without having an energy policy when it would have an adverse impact.
The bottom line is you're unwilling to apologize for your company statement. Okay.
We're joined now by Senator Robert Menendez of New Jersey, who co-sponsored the bill that would repeal oil industry subsidies and who did not get that apology from ConocoPhillips CEO Jim Mulva today. Senator, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Good to be with you.
The implied threat today from these oil companies was that if you cut their taxpayer subsidies, prices will go up, and that it will hurt, I guess, oil industry jobs. Is that what you understand their threat to be?
Well, Rachel, I can't understand what their threats are, and I couldn't understand how those 5 CEOs could come in before the United States Senate and the American people and say that going from $125 billion in profits this year collectively among the big 5 oil companies to $123 billion this year if we take away those subsidies is somehow going to create cost jobs, is somehow going to be a catastrophe, is somehow going to cause them to increase the price of gasoline. It's pretty outrageous across the board. All of their testimony, in my mind, was pretty outrageous across the board. And, of course, with the ConocoPhillips saying it's un-American, well, I know most Americans whose median income is about $50,000, they can't quite understand why they have to, in addition to pay at the pump $4 a gallon, have to dig in their pockets and give the oil companies $21 billion over the next 10 years.
In addition to your sort of moment today that we played at the top of this segment, you talking to ConocoPhillips, their CEO, about that un-American charge. Another moment that really struck me today was Senator Ron Wyden playing tape of these same companies, same major oil companies, saying when oil was half the price that it is now, that oil price was so high they really didn't need their subsidies anymore. Now, when they're getting double that amount for the price of a barrel of oil, they're saying they do need the subsidies. How do they explain that change?
Well, I really don't think they explain it to anyone's satisfaction. A different CEO, same company, but it's the same proposition that former President Bush, who was very friendly to the oil industry, said, well, after $55 a barrel, you don't need the subsidies. Well, we're at about 100. You know, that others have said as well. I mean, Speaker Boehner has referred to this in the past. Now he's walking it back because I guess he's getting pressed by big oil. Congressman Ryan, the budget chairman, the Republican budget chairman in the House, has talked about eliminating these subsidies. A whole host of my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle in the Senate have talked about this. So, you know, it seems to me that this is unexplainable by the industry, and no matter how they shape it or want to spin it, it's just one of those things that they should have come in and said, look, we're ready to join in reducing the deficit, because under my legislation we take the $21 billion in the tax breaks they're getting and we put it directly towards deficit reduction. We're all talking about reducing deficits. We need shared sacrifice. Certainly the oil companies that are making $125 billion this year in profits, not revenues, in profits, could afford to let go of those $2 billion a year for the next 10 years.
You have been vocal in describing what you think is the political potency of this issue, saying that you are willing to keep talking about this as frequently as you can, given that Republicans haven't come up with really a political answer for it. When this ultimately is voted on in the Senate, in terms of how this proceeds as a policy matter, do you expect that any Republicans will peel off from their party line on this and join Democrats in voting to repeal these subsidies, or do you think it's going to be a 100% Republican no vote?
You know, Rachel, we'll see. There are at least 5 Republican colleagues, present members of the Senate, who have said in one form or another that these subsidies no longer are needed and should be repealed. You know, so there'll be that moment, and their words versus their votes. And hopefully they'll join us. But I'm convinced we're going to do this. because whether this is done through my legislation or whether this is done as part of any debt ceiling vote, which we'll insist on, or whether it's done as part of any budget vote, we are going to eliminate these subsidies. I don't know how any of these 5 CEOs can come before the nation and say that making $123 billion versus making $125 billion is un-American. I think the average person out there in the country must have said, these people, Jay Rockefeller got it right. They're so out of touch that it's just incredible to have heard them make the statements they made, and incredible for ConocoPhillips to say it's un-American. It's un-American that we, in fact, permit them to, in foreign countries, instead of paying a royalty, they have it ultimately fashioned as a tax so they can get that whole tax break here in the United States. And what U.S. taxpayers are doing is subsidizing the production of foreign oil. That's ridiculous. That's one of the things that I'll eliminate in my bill.
Senator Robert Menendez of New Jersey, one of the Democratic senators calling for the repeal of oil industry subsidies, leading on this legislatively. Many thanks for your time tonight, sir. Really appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Rachel.
Take note of what Senator Menendez said there about that debt ceiling discussion, right? If that is not just a standalone, clean, one-issue debt ceiling vote and other things are going to be folded in on that, Senator Menendez saying that oil industry subsidies will be one of the things that Democrats insist be folded into that vote. Oh, really?